Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories, subscribe my YouTube channel. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. I was somewhere along the stretch of highway between nowhere and almost there, a 2-hour haul from any town with more than one stoplight, when my bladder screamed its final protest. I'd been driving for nearly 8 hours, chasing a deadline I shouldn't have agreed to. The sun had dipped hours ago, and now only the rhythmic pulse of my headlights pierced the smothering darkness. When I finally spotted the neon glow of a roadside rest stop sign, flickering and half-lit, I almost cried with relief. I pulled into the cracked asphalt lot, gravel crunching beneath my tires. The place looked abandoned, save for the single flickering light above the bathroom building. The sign read, "Restrooms, open 24 hours." As I stepped out of the car, the silence pressed in. No cars. No people. Just the hum of insects and the low howl of wind. But my need outweighed my caution. I grabbed my keys, locking the car out of habit, and walked across the lot. Inside, the restroom was dimly lit by a couple of buzzing fluorescent lights. The air smelled faintly of bleach and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet. There were 4 stalls, each with scratched metal doors. The first 3 were marked with fading out-of-order signs, handwritten in shaky script. The 4th stall, the one furthest from the door, stood open slightly, the hinges creaking as if stirred by an invisible breeze. As I approached, I noticed a small, neatly printed sign taped above the sink. Read, "One rule, never knock on the last stall." I chuckled under my breath. Some urban legend nonsense, I figured. But something about the starkness of the message made my skin prickle. Still, I wasn't here for ghost stories. I stepped into the 4th stall, closed the door, and tried not to think about it. As I did my business, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt heavier, like the walls were inching closer. There was a faint scratching sound coming from somewhere, too faint to locate. I tried to convince myself it was the wind or maybe a mouse trapped behind the tiles. But the sound grew louder, more deliberate. It was coming from the last stall. I finished quickly, flushed, and stepped out, the hairs on the back of my neck standing at attention. I glanced toward the last stall again. It was closed now. The door was shut tight, though I hadn't seen it move. My pulse quickened. I backed toward the sink, avoiding looking directly at the stall. As I washed my hands, I heard it, a faint knock. Soft, deliberate, as if someone inside was testing the boundary. I froze, my hands still under the cold stream of water. Another knock. Louder this time. Then a whisper so faint I thought I might be imagining it. "Come closer." I yanked my hands away from the water and grabbed my keys, my breath quickening. I turned toward the exit, but the door wouldn't budge. It rattled in its frame, stuck. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Desperation clawed at me. I pulled at the door, slammed my shoulder into it, but it refused to move. Behind me, the knocking was a pounding now, accompanied by a low, gurgling growl that seemed to echo from the walls. I spun around just as the last stall door burst open, slamming against the tiled wall with a metallic crash. A shadow spilled out, darker than the dim light should allow, and it slithered along the floor like a living oil slick. It reared up, forming a shape that was almost human but twisted, too long, too thin, with glistening skin like wet leather. Its head was smooth, featureless except for a gaping, tooth-lined maw that opened impossibly wide. It surged toward me. I screamed, throwing myself against the restroom door. This time it gave way and I tumbled out into the night air, gasping. I scrambled to my feet and ran for my car, not daring to look back. I could hear it behind me, the slap of something wet and heavy against the ground. I fumbled with my keys, almost dropping them in my panic. I yanked open the door and dove inside, slamming it shut just as something scraped against the metal. I twisted the ignition, the engine roared to life, and I floored it, tires screaming as I tore out of the lot. In my rearview mirror, I saw it, the shadow standing at the edge of the lot, its head cocked as if curious, its mouth slowly closing. Then it faded, melting back into the darkness. I drove for miles before I dared slow down, my heart racing. When I finally pulled over to catch my breath, I noticed something strange. My side mirror was gone, as if something had torn it clean off. My car was scratched down the side, long gouges like claw marks scoring the paint. I thought about the rule on the sign. I thought about the knocking. And I realized, I hadn't knocked. It had. The highway ahead was empty, my headlights slicing through the darkness like weak beams against a tide of ink. I'd driven for nearly an hour, but the fear hadn't ebbed. Every shadow seemed to lean closer. The edges of my vision crawled with imagined shapes. I told myself it was just the adrenaline, just the mind trying to fill the void with answers, but a deeper part of me, the part that had heard that whisper, knew better. I finally pulled into a gas station, the flickering sign and the faint smell of diesel anchoring me back to reality. Inside, a lone clerk stood behind the counter, flipping through a battered magazine. I approached, trying to sound casual despite the tremor in my voice. "Hey, do you know anything about the rest stop back there? About the bathroom?" The clerk's head snapped up. His eyes were too wide, pupils dilated like he'd just heard a gunshot. He leaned closer. "You went in there?" I nodded. His face paled and he swallowed hard. "You didn't knock, did you?" I shook my head, but my voice faltered. "No." But something knocked back. He exhaled a shaky breath, then gestured for me to come closer. He spoke in a low, urgent whisper. "That place has been cursed for years. Folks around here say it's the last thing left of something older. Something that likes to collect." I felt my skin crawl. "Collect what?" He glanced around nervously as though afraid the walls might hear. "People. Souls. Anyone who disturbs it. The rule is old, older than this town. Never knock on the last stall. If you do, you're inviting it in. But if it knocks first..." His voice trailed off. I felt cold seep into my bones. "Then what?" He hesitated, then whispered, "Then it means it's chosen you." I backed away, my stomach churning. The clerk glanced at me with pity. "If you're smart, you'll leave town. Tonight. Don't stop. And whatever you do, don't answer if you hear it knock again." I hurried out, my heart hammering, but as I reached my car I froze. There, etched into the dust on the driver's side window, were 3 faint knocks. Just smudges, but unmistakably there. My breath caught in my throat. I climbed into the car, locking the doors. The steering wheel was slick in my hands, sweat gathering on my palms. I started the engine and peeled out of the lot, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't stop driving until dawn painted the sky in streaks of pink and gray. I found a cheap motel and collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion dragging me under. But sleep brought no peace. I woke to a faint tapping at the window. Soft, deliberate. Just 3 knocks. I bolted upright, heart hammering. The window was closed, the curtain drawn, but the sound was unmistakable. I backed away from the window, grabbed my bag and fled the room, ignoring the protests of the sleepy desk clerk. Back in the car, I drove until my eyes burned and my body screamed for rest. But no matter how far I went, the feeling of being followed lingered. I couldn't escape the soft, rhythmic knocking, sometimes at the window, sometimes just at the edge of hearing. By the time I reached another town, the signs were clear. Scratches along the car's doors. Handprints in the dust on the windows. Once, I returned to the car after grabbing coffee, only to find the trunk partially ajar, though I knew I hadn't opened it. I couldn't shake the clerk's words. "It means it's chosen you." That night, I tried to sleep in a different motel, far from any highways or rest stops. But the knocking came again, louder this time, accompanied by faint whispers. I pressed a pillow over my ears, but they bled through, thin and insistent. "Let me in." I woke gasping, drenched in sweat, to find the bathroom door in my motel room standing wide open. I was sure I had closed it. Inside, the mirror was fogged as though someone had just taken a shower. And there, in the condensation, were 3 faint knocks traced into the glass. I fled. I drove without stopping, my mind unraveling, the knocks following me like an echo I couldn't outrun. The radio in my car started to pick up faint whispers between stations, and once I could have sworn I saw a shape in the rearview mirror, a long, thin figure crouched in the back seat, vanishing the moment I looked directly at it. I knew then that running wouldn't save me. It wasn't tied to the rest stop anymore. It was tied to me. The road stretched endlessly, a black ribbon flanked by fields of silent corn and shadowed trees. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the wheel, the hum of the tires and the whisper of wind the only sounds to accompany me. But behind those sounds, hidden in the spaces between heartbeats, was the faint tapping, always there, always close. I tried turning the radio up, drowning it in static and old country ballads, but no matter how loud the music blared, I heard it. 3 faint, deliberate knocks. Sometimes from the window, sometimes from the dashboard, sometimes from nowhere at all. By the 3rd day of relentless driving, sleep deprivation gnawed at my mind. I couldn't remember the last time I had eaten. My hands trembled, my eyes stung, and when I blinked too long, I saw shapes gathering at the edge of the road, shadows long and thin, leaning towards me like curious onlookers. I pulled into a gas station, desperate for something, anything, to keep me awake. The clerk behind the counter, an older woman with gray hair piled atop her head, looked up sharply when I entered. "You've got it on you," she said softly before I could speak. I froze. "What are you talking about?" Her voice was low, barely audible over the hum of the coolers. "The knocking. The whispers. You disturbed it, didn't you?" I swallowed hard. "I didn't knock. It knocked first." She made the sign of the cross. "That's worse. It means it chose you. You let it in without knowing." "Then how do I stop it?" I asked, my voice cracking with desperation. Her expression turned grim. "There's only one way. You have to go back. Back. To the rest stop. To the last stall. You have to face it or it'll follow you forever." The thought of returning made my skin crawl. But I couldn't keep running. I was being hunted by something I couldn't see, something that knew me now. So, against every instinct screaming at me, I turned the car around and headed back. The drive felt longer, the sky growing darker with every mile. As I neared the rest stop, the radio cut out entirely, replaced by static so thick it seemed to vibrate the air itself. My headlights flickered, casting jerky beams of light across the cracked pavement. When I finally pulled into the lot, it was empty, just like before. The flickering lamplight cast sickly yellow pools onto the pavement. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as I stepped out of the car, each footfall echoing too loud against the silence. The bathroom door stood ajar just as I had left it. My hands trembled as I approached, and as I crossed the threshold, the air grew colder, heavy with the scent of mildew and something sharper, like rust or old blood. Inside, the lights flickered erratically, casting shadows that seemed to twist and writhe. The last stall door was closed. It looked just as before, battered and stained, the wood warped from years of moisture. I hesitated, then stepped closer. The knocking came again, 3 sharp raps from inside the stall. I jumped back, heart racing. But then I remembered the old woman's words, "Face it." I forced myself to speak. "What do you want?" Silence. Then, in a voice dry as dead leaves, it whispered, "Let me out." My breath caught in my throat. The door shuddered, trembling as though something inside was pressing against it. I backed away, shaking my head. No, I didn't knock. You can't." The door slammed once, so hard it rattled the walls. The lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, using its dim glow to find the exit, but the air had thickened, pressing in from all sides. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, twisting around each other. "Let me out. Let me out. Let me out." I stumbled back, my foot catching on something slick. I looked down and saw the floor was wet, stained with something dark and thick that wasn't water. Panic clawed at me. I turned and fled, the whispers rising to a crescendo as I burst out of the bathroom and into the cold night air. But the knocking didn't stop. It echoed inside my head louder and louder until I realized it wasn't coming from the stall anymore. It was coming from me. I drove through the night, headlights slicing through the heavy darkness like dull blades. But no matter how far I went, no matter how fast the car roared down the highway, the knocking remained. It was as if it had burrowed deep beneath my skin, lodging itself somewhere between muscle and bone. At first it was subtle. A faint echo in my chest, a tap-tap-tap that aligned too perfectly with my heartbeat. But as dawn broke pale and cold across the empty road, it grew louder, stronger. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, and each time I blinked, I thought I saw flashes of something sitting in the passenger seat. A shape, gray and indistinct, shifting with each beat of the knock. I pulled into a small town just as the sun struggled to climb above the horizon. The streets were quiet, the windows of the old shops dark and shuttered. Desperation gnawed at me. I parked in front of a diner, its neon sign buzzing faintly, and stumbled inside. A waitress, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, looked up from behind the counter. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice low. I nodded, collapsing into a booth. The knocking had dulled to a low thud, almost bearable now, but every time I exhaled, it surged up again, louder, sharper. When she brought the coffee, she set it down with trembling hands. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, then leaned closer. "Have you ever heard knocking? From nowhere?" She stiffened. "The last stall," she murmured, eyes darting to the window as if something might be listening. "You didn't knock, did you?" "No," I said. "But it knocked first." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Then it chose you. There's no running from it now." Panic clawed at my throat. "What can I do?" She glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "There's an old church. At the edge of town. They say it was built on consecrated ground. Maybe it can help. But hurry. It doesn't like sunlight." I left a few bills on the counter and stumbled out, heart racing. The knocking inside me had grown louder, more insistent, as if it could sense I was planning to stop it. The road to the church twisted through thick woods, branches clawing at the car like grasping fingers. The knocking became a hammering, a deep, resonant pounding that rattled my bones. The church was small and weathered, its paint peeling, the windows cracked and dusty. But it was quiet. Mercifully, blessedly quiet. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside, breath catching. The air felt different here. Lighter. The oppressive weight that had followed me lifted slightly. I staggered to the front, collapsing near the altar, hands clenched in prayer though I wasn't sure to whom I prayed. "Please," I whispered. "Please make it stop." The knocking slowed, then ceased altogether. I let out a shaky breath, tears stinging my eyes. Relief flooded me. But then from behind me came a faint voice. "You shouldn't have come here." I spun around. An old man in a tattered priest's robe stood in the shadows, his face gaunt and pale. His eyes were black pits, bottomless. "It doesn't stop," he said softly. "Not really. Not forever. It only hides." I backed away, heart pounding. "What are you talking about?" He stepped forward, and in the flickering candlelight I saw his hands. They were raw and bleeding, knuckles split open as though he'd been pounding on a door for years. "You invited it in," he whispered. "Now you carry it. And one day, sooner than you think, you'll be the one knocking." A chill crawled up my spine as the church seemed to darken around me. The candle flames guttered. I turned and fled, but as I reached the door, the knocking resumed, this time not just from within me but from every surface. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. And worst of all, from behind the altar. I ran, stumbling through the graveyard, heart hammering as the sun dipped below the horizon. In the distance I could hear it, the slow, steady tapping of knuckles on wood, growing louder, faster, until it drowned out everything else. But this time I realized with dawning horror, it wasn't just inside me. It was coming from everywhere. I didn't stop running until the church was a distant silhouette against the blood-colored sky. My breath tore from my chest in ragged gasps, and my legs threatened to collapse beneath me. But the knocking followed, like a relentless pulse vibrating through the air, through the ground, through me. The town had changed. It was no longer just empty streets and shuttered windows. Shadows moved where no light should be, crawling along walls and creeping down alleys. The knocking echoed from every direction now, a twisted symphony that made the hairs on my neck stand up. I stumbled into a narrow alley behind the diner where I'd stopped before. The waitress was there, but her eyes were blank, her face slack. She stared at me with a faint, mechanical smile. "You knocked," she whispered. "I didn't." I insisted, but even as I said it, I remembered the faint echo of my knuckles brushing that cursed stall. Her smile widened impossibly. "It's part of you now. There's no escape." I backed away, turning into the street, and found the townsfolk gathering. Their faces were pale, their hands twitching as if they were hearing something I couldn't yet fully grasp. They formed a loose circle around me, murmuring in unison. "You knocked. You knocked. You knocked." The world tilted. I felt as though I were falling, spinning into some unseen void. The knocking was deafening, pounding through my skull like a hammer against glass. My vision darkened at the edges and I sank to my knees. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something, a flicker of movement in the corner of the diner window. A reflection. My reflection. But it wasn't me. In the window I saw myself standing tall and calm, smiling softly. But my eyes were pitch black and my hands were raw and bloodied from endless knocking. The reflection raised one hand and tapped the glass with one finger. Tap, tap, tap. And with each knock I felt my own body responding involuntarily. My hands moved against the pavement, tapping along in rhythm. My voice joined the chorus of whispers. "You knocked. You knocked." I realized the truth in that instant. The knocking wasn't an outside force. It was a contagion. A curse passed from one person to the next like a sick game of tag. The only rule was simple: never knock on the last stall. But once you heard the knock and acknowledged it, whether by knocking yourself or by answering its call, you were marked. I was marked. The shadows closed in, the townsfolk drawing nearer, their eyes wide and gleaming with something inhuman. The tapping became a storm, a hurricane of noise that tore at the fabric of reality itself. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the chorus. My vision blackened entirely, and I felt myself falling through endless knocking, through the hollow spaces between worlds. When I awoke, I was no longer in the town. I was in a rest stop bathroom. The one from the beginning. The door to the last stall stood ajar, and from within I heard it, the faintest of knocks. I tried to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't move. My hand lifted against my will, knuckles poised to tap the stall. And just before my fist made contact, I realized with dawning horror that this was the end, and the beginning. I was the one knocking now. Forever. Thanks for watching, like, share, and subscribe.